The sun was just beginning to set behind the rugged mountains of Nevada when Sophia Ellis realized she was no longer a person, but property. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the tattered edges of the document her uncle had thrust into her hands, a bill of sale with her name listed among his possessions, right beside his cattle and farming equipment. It was the summer of 1879, and at 20 years old, Sophia had already endured more hardship than most people faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 16 after a fever took both her parents within days of each other, she'd been sent to live with her father's brother, Vernon Ellis, on his modest ranch outside of Rhyolite, Nevada. What had begun as a temporary arrangement had slowly transformed into a nightmare of servitude. "You can't do this," Sophia whispered, her voice cracking as she stared at her uncle across the kitchen table. The oil lamp between them cast harsh shadows across Vernon's weathered face, highlighting the coldness in his eyes. "Already done," Vernon replied, taking a long swig from his whiskey bottle. "Signed and sealed. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you arrived. Can't cook worth a damn, can't keep the house proper, and scared of the livestock. What use are you to me?" "I'm your niece, your blood," Sophia pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Not some commodity to be traded." Vernon's laugh was hollow. Blood don't put food on the table or pay off gambling debts." He leaned forward, the stench of alcohol heavy on his breath. "Tomorrow morning you'll be going with Harlow Green. He's agreed to take you in exchange for 8 horses. 8 horses. The words fell from Sophia's lips like stones. "That's all I'm worth to you. Consider yourself lucky. He's overpaying," Vernon sneered, pushing back from the table. "Pack your things. You leave at dawn." The floorboards creaked under Sophia's feet as she retreated to her small bedroom. The space was barely larger than a closet, just enough room for a narrow bed and a trunk that held the few possessions she'd brought from her parents' home. She slumped onto the threadbare quilt, clutching a faded daguerreotype of her mother and father on their wedding day. They looked so young, so full of hope. "What would you do?" she whispered to their frozen smiles. Sleep evaded Sophia that night. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities about what awaited her. Harlow Green was a name she'd heard mentioned in hushed tones around town, a man with a reputation for cruelty and a temper fueled by drink, not unlike her uncle. The thought of becoming his property made her physically ill. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, Sophia made a decision. She would run. There had to be somewhere she could go, someone who would help her. Perhaps the sheriff or the minister's wife. Surely they wouldn't stand for this kind of barbaric transaction. She stuffed her few belongings into a small sack, the daguerreotype, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, a hairbrush, and the one dress she owned besides the one she wore. She crept to the kitchen and added a hunk of bread and some dried beef, along with the small amount of money she'd managed to save by mending clothes for the women in town. Just as she was easing open the back door, a floorboard creaked behind her. Vernon stood in the hallway, a shotgun resting casually against his shoulder. "Going somewhere, girl?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Uncle Vernon, please," Sophia begged. "You can't do this. It's not legal. It's not right." "Legal," he scoffed. "Out here, legal is whatever a man says it is. And I say you're going with Green. Now get back to your room before I decide you're more trouble than you're worth." Defeated, Sophia returned to her bedroom, where she sat on the edge of her bed until the sun rose fully above the mountains. The sound of horses and a wagon approaching the house made her stomach clench with dread. "Ellis, get out here with the girl," a rough voice called. Sophia's hands shook as she picked up her small sack. This was it. Her uncle was selling her like livestock. She stepped out of her room to find Vernon already at the door, speaking with a portly, red-faced man whose beard was stained yellow around the mouth. "There she is," Vernon said, gesturing toward Sophia. "Healthy enough, can read and write better than most. Been keeping my house these past 4 years. Harlow Green's eyes traveled over Sophia with a calculating gaze that made her skin crawl. "Bit skinny," he commented, as if appraising a mare. "She eats less than a bird," Vernon replied. "Saves on food costs." "The horses are out front," Green said, jerking his thumb toward the yard. 8 prime Mustangs, just like we agreed, broke them myself. Vernon nodded, clearly eager to complete the transaction. She's all yours then. Green reached for Sophia's arm, his thick fingers digging into her flesh. Come on then, girl. I've got a long ride back to my place. As they stepped onto the porch, Sophia caught her first glimpse of her worth 8 Mustangs tethered to Vernon's hitching post. But something else caught her eye as well, a lone rider approaching from the direction of town, tall in the saddle of a magnificent black stallion. What's this? The stranger called out, his deep voice carrying across the yard as he drew his horse to a stop. Sophia felt a flicker of hope at the interruption, though she dared not let it grow. The newcomer was a striking figure, broad-shouldered and lean, with dark hair visible beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Unlike Vernon and Green, whose clothes were perpetually soiled and rumpled, this man's attire, though practical for riding, appeared well kept. Private business, Green barked. Move along, stranger. The man dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of countless hours in the saddle. Couldn't help but overhear in town that there was to be some unusual trading happening out at the Ellis place this morning. His eyes met Sophia's briefly before focusing on Green. Horses for a woman, they said, thought surely I'd misheard. Vernon stepped forward, his shoulders squared defensively. What happens on my property is my concern, not yours. Name's Wyatt Finnegan, the stranger said, ignoring Vernon's hostility. Just bought the old Thornton place west of town, planning to raise horses. He glanced at the Mustangs, then back at Green. Fine animals you've got there, Green puffed up with pride. Best Mustangs you'll find in these parts, broke them myself. I can see that, Wyatt said, walking over to inspect one of the horses. Seems like quite a lot of horseflesh to trade for. He paused, looking pointedly at Sophia, who stood frozen between hope and despair. The girl's my property, Vernon interjected. Can trade her as I see fit. Wyatt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Is that so? He turned to Sophia. And what's your name, miss? Before Sophia could answer, Green stepped between them. Don't matter what her name is, she's spoken for. Actually, Wyatt said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a leather pouch that jingled with the unmistakable sound of coins, I'd like to make an offer on those horses. Green's eyes narrowed suspiciously. They ain't for sale, they're for trade. $300, Wyatt said, weighing the pouch in his hand. For all 8. The amount made both Vernon and Green go still. It was far more than the horses were worth, and everyone present knew it. Green recovered first, greed battling with suspicion on his face. What's your game, Finnegan? No game, Wyatt replied evenly. I need good stock for my ranch, and these look promising. $300, cash in hand, that's my offer. Vernon stepped forward eagerly. Deal's already been made, Finnegan. Green gets the girl, I get the horses. $400, Wyatt countered, producing another pouch from his saddlebag. Green's resolve was visibly weakening. I need a woman to keep my house. There's women in town looking for work, Wyatt said. Women who'll work for wages, not ownership. $500 final offer. The sum was staggering enough to buy a decent piece of land or a small business in town. Green looked between Sophia and the money, his internal struggle plain on his face. Fine, he finally grunted. $500. Wyatt counted out the money while Sophia watched in stunned silence. What did this mean for her? If her uncle got the horses and the money, would she still be Green's property? Or would she now belong to this stranger, Wyatt Finnegan? Once the transaction was complete, Green mounted his horse without a backward glance at Sophia and rode off, the heavy pouches of coins secured in his saddlebags. Vernon turned to Wyatt with a greedy glint in his eyes. Now, about my niece, I didn't buy her, Wyatt interrupted firmly. I bought the horses, and as the new owner, I'll do with them as I please. He turned to Sophia, his expression softening. Miss, I'd like to give you these horses. Sophia stared at him in confusion. Give me? I don't understand. They're yours, Wyatt said simply, all 8 of them. To keep, to sell, to do with as you please. Vernon's face contorted with rage. Now wait just a minute. You can't. I believe I can, Wyatt cut in, his voice hardening as he faced Vernon. Unless you'd like to explain to Sheriff Johnson how you were attempting to sell your own niece. I'm sure he'd find that mighty interesting, as would Judge Wilson. Vernon's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. "Miss Ellis," Wyatt continued, turning back to Sophia, "you might want to gather your things. I doubt you'll want to stay here any longer." Hope and disbelief warred within Sophia. "But where would I go?" "There's a women's boarding house in town," Wyatt suggested. "Mrs. Palmer runs it. She's a good woman, or if you prefer, I could take you to the next town over. Your choice." Sophia looked at the 8 horses that were now, incredibly, her property. With their value, she could support herself for quite some time while she figured out her next steps. For the first time in years, she had options. "Why?" she asked, looking up at Wyatt. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" A shadow crossed Wyatt's face. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing." He offered a small smile. "Besides, no one should be valued in horses, no matter how fine the stock." As Vernon slunk back into the house, muttering curses under his breath, Sophia felt as though she were waking from a long nightmare. The morning sun seemed brighter suddenly, the air fresher. She was free. "I'll get my things," she said, straightening her shoulders. "And then I'd like to go to town, if you wouldn't mind escorting me." Wyatt nodded. "I'd be honored, Miss Ellis." As Sophia hurried to gather her few possessions, her mind raced with possibilities. For years, she'd been existing, not living, surviving day to day under her uncle's cruel regime. Now, suddenly, she had resources, choices, and perhaps most importantly, her dignity restored. When she emerged from the house for the last time, Wyatt was waiting with her horses hitched to follow behind his stallion. He helped her mount one of the gentler mares, his hands strong but respectful as he gave her a boost into the saddle. "Ready?" he asked. Sophia took one last look at the place that had been her prison for 4 long years. "More than ready," she replied, and together they rode away from Vernon Ellis's property, toward Rhyolite and whatever future awaited. The ride into town gave Sophia time to absorb the dramatic change in her circumstances. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats against the dusty trail was almost hypnotic, allowing her thoughts to settle like disturbed silt in a stream. Beside her, Wyatt Finnegan rode in companionable silence, seeming to understand her need to process the morning's events. Rhyolite came into view as they crested a small rise, a collection of wooden buildings and canvas tents nestled in the shadow of bare mountains. It wasn't much of a town yet, having sprung up just a few years earlier when silver was discovered in the hills, but it was growing. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church, the sheriff's office, and various other businesses catering to miners and ranchers. "The boarding house is just past the general store," Wyatt said as they rode down the main street. People stopped to stare at the procession. A well-dressed cowboy and a young woman leading 8 Mustangs through town was certainly a spectacle worth noting. "Mr. Finnegan," Sophia began hesitantly, "I don't know how to thank you properly." Wyatt's smile was warm. "No thanks necessary, Miss Ellis, though I admit I acted impulsively. I hadn't quite thought through the practicalities. 8 horses are a lot for anyone to manage, let alone." "A woman alone," she finished for him, a hint of challenge in her voice. He chuckled. "I was going to say someone without a stable or grazing land, but you make a fair point. People around here might find it unusual." "People around here were willing to let a man sell his niece," Sophia pointed out, her tone bitter. "Not everyone," Wyatt countered gently. "Word travels fast in small towns. That's how I heard about it and was able to intervene." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building with a small porch and window boxes filled with hardy desert flowers. A sign above the door read, "Palmer's Lodging, clean rooms, fair rates." "I'll speak to Mrs. Palmer about a room for you," Wyatt offered, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "And perhaps we can discuss what to do about your new herd." Inside, the boarding house was simple but meticulously clean. The front room served as a small parlor, with a few chairs arranged around a stone fireplace. A doorway at the back presumably led to a dining room, judging by the smell of cooking food wafting through the air. "Mr. Finnegan." A plump, gray-haired woman emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. "Twice in one day, to what do I owe the pleasure, Mrs. Palmer?" Wyatt greeted her with a respectful nod. May I introduce Miss Sophia Ellis? She's in need of lodging. Mrs. Palmer's kind eyes assessed Sophia quickly, taking in her worn dress and the small sack of possessions she clutched. Ellis, Vernon's niece, Sophia nodded, suddenly self-conscious under the woman's scrutiny. Well, come in, child, Mrs. Palmer said, gesturing toward one of the chairs. Sit down before you fall down. You look like you've had quite a morning. You have no idea, Sophia murmured. While Mrs. Palmer busied herself preparing tea, Wyatt explained the situation in hushed tones. The older woman's expression shifted from concern to outrage to compassion. That Vernon Ellis, she muttered, setting a steaming cup in front of Sophia. Always was a no-account scoundrel. Even as a boy, he was mean as a snake. Your poor mother must be turning in her grave. Sophia sipped the tea, grateful for its warmth and the normalcy of the moment. Did you know my mother, Elizabeth? Of course I did. We went to school together back east before she met your father and moved out here. Mrs. Palmer settled into a chair across from Sophia. You have her eyes, you know, same determined look. The mention of her mother brought unexpected tears to Sophia's eyes. She'd been so young when her parents died, and the years with her uncle had been so harsh that sometimes it was hard to remember there had been a time when she was loved and protected. Now, Mrs. Palmer continued briskly, perhaps sensing Sophia's emotion, of course you can stay here. I have a lovely room on the second floor with a view of the mountains. As for those horses outside, quite a stir they're causing. I might add we'll need to find somewhere to stable them. I have space at my ranch, Wyatt offered. It's not fully operational yet, but there's a decent barn and plenty of grazing land. That's very kind, Sophia said hesitantly, but I couldn't impose further. It's no imposition, Wyatt assured her. In fact, I could use help with the place. I'm planning to breed and train horses, but the house needs a woman's touch, and there's plenty of work to go around. Mrs. Palmer's eyebrows rose significantly at this suggestion. Mr. Finnegan, while I'm sure your intentions are honorable, a young woman living alone at a bachelor's ranch would cause quite the scandal. Wyatt had the grace to look abashed. Of course, you're right, I wasn't thinking. However, Mrs. Palmer continued thoughtfully, if Miss Ellis were to stay here in town and ride out to work at the ranch during daylight hours, that would be entirely proper. And it would solve the problem of what to do with those horses. Sophia considered the proposal. She needed work, and the chance to be around horses, animals she'd always loved but her uncle had kept her away from was appealing. Plus, there was something about Wyatt Finnegan that intrigued her. Not just his kindness in saving her from Green, but the quiet strength he exuded, the respect with which he treated her. I know very little about horses, she admitted. You'll learn, Wyatt said confidently, and I suspect you know more than you think. Horses respond to kindness and patience qualities I imagine you have in abundance, given what you've endured. His words warmed Sophia in a way the tea hadn't. Then I accept, Mr. Finnegan, both your offer of employment and your generosity in stabling my horses. Wonderful, Mrs. Palmer declared, clapping her hands together. Now let me show you to your room and then you should rest. It's been quite a day already and it's barely noon. As Mrs. Palmer led Sophia upstairs, she couldn't help glancing back at Wyatt, who stood watching her with an unreadable expression. For the first time in years, Sophia felt something stir within her that she'd thought long dead hope. The room Mrs. Palmer showed her to was small but charming, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the main street. Rest now, the older woman advised. I'll bring up some lunch later. We can discuss arrangements for your work and board after you've had some time to settle. Left alone, Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, still trying to comprehend how dramatically her life had changed in just a few hours. This morning, she'd awakened as property to be traded. Now she was free, employed, and the owner of 8 horses. It seemed impossible. From her window, she could see Wyatt speaking with the blacksmith across the street, presumably making arrangements for temporarily boarding her horses until they could be moved to his ranch. The sun glinted off his dark hair as he removed his hat to wipe his brow. A strange feeling fluttered in Sophia's chest, something between gratitude and another emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. Whatever it was, she quickly tamped it down. Wyatt Finnegan might be her benefactor and now her employer, but she'd be wise to remember that her independence was newfound and fragile. The last thing she needed was to develop tender feelings for the first man who'd shown her kindness. Still, as she watched him shake hands with the blacksmith and mount his stallion to lead her horses away, Sophia couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. For the first time in years, the uncertainty felt like promise rather than threat. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline light unique to the Nevada desert. Sophia woke feeling refreshed after the first peaceful night's sleep she'd had in years. No fear of her uncle's drunken rage, no dread of what new cruelty awaited her. Just the soft quilt against her skin and the distant sounds of the town coming to life outside her window. After washing and dressing in her one good dress, which, in truth, was barely adequate, she made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Palmer already busy in the kitchen. "Good morning, dear," the older woman greeted her. "Sleep well, better than I have in ages," Sophia admitted, taking a seat at the kitchen table where several other boarders, 2 school teachers, and an elderly widow were already having breakfast. "Ladies, this is Miss Ellis, Mrs. Palmer introduced her. "She'll be staying with us for a while." The women nodded politely, though Sophia caught the curious glances they exchanged. News traveled fast in small towns, and she had no doubt that by now everyone knew of her uncle's attempt to trade her. "Mr. Finnegan stopped by earlier," Mrs. Palmer mentioned casually as she placed a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of Sophia. "Said he'd return around 9 to escort you to his ranch if that suits." "Yes, that would be fine," Sophia replied, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the mention of Wyatt. "Thank you." As she ate, the other women engaged her in conversation, asking where she was from originally and how she liked Rhyolite. They were polite enough not to mention the circumstances that had brought her to the boarding house, for which Sophia was grateful. After breakfast, Mrs. Palmer took Sophia aside. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said. "You'll need proper clothes for ranch work. I have some things that might fit you with a bit of alteration." "That's very kind, but I couldn't—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Palmer interrupted firmly. "Consider it an advance on your board. You'll pay me back once you start earning wages from Mr. Finnegan." She led Sophia to a small room off the kitchen that served as her private quarters and pulled a trunk from beneath her bed. From it, she produced several sturdy skirts, shirtwaists, and a pair of worn but serviceable boots. "These belong to my daughter," she explained, a shadow crossing her face. "She passed on 3 years ago. Consumption." "I'm so sorry," Sophia said, genuinely moved by the woman's loss and generosity. "She'd want them to be used," Mrs. Palmer said, straightening her shoulders. "Now, let's get you changed before Mr. Finnegan arrives." By the time Wyatt arrived, Sophia was dressed in a practical brown skirt and white shirtwaist, with the boots that were only slightly too large. Mrs. Palmer had even found her a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the desert sun. "Miss Ellis," Wyatt greeted her, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her transformed appearance. "You look ready for ranch work." "Thanks to Mrs. Palmer," Sophia replied, feeling oddly shy under his gaze. "I've brought a horse for you to ride," he said, gesturing outside where 2 horses waited, his black stallion and one of her mustangs, a dun mare with gentle eyes. "I thought you might like to get to know one of your own." The mare, whom Wyatt had started calling Honey for her golden coat, proved to be as gentle as she looked. Sophia, who had ridden occasionally before coming to live with her uncle, found her seat quickly enough, though she was grateful for Wyatt's patience as they set off at a leisurely pace. "It's about 5 miles to the ranch," he explained as they rode out of town. "Not too far, but far enough that you'll want to be comfortable in the saddle." The desert landscape unfurled before them, seemingly barren at first glance, but teeming with life upon closer inspection. Wyatt pointed out various plants and their uses, from the medicinal properties of certain cacti to which shrubs indicated underground water sources. He had an easy way about him, sharing knowledge without condescension, and Sophia found herself relaxing in his company. "How long have you been in Rhyolite?" she asked as they rode side by side along the trail. "Just 3 months," Wyatt replied. "I came west from Colorado after buying the Thornton Place site unseen. Old man Thornton was a friend of my father's. When he died with no heirs, his lawyer reached out to see if I was interested." "And were you interested, I mean?" Wyatt was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I needed a fresh start," he said finally. "Lost my wife and son to diphtheria 2 years ago. After that, Colorado didn't feel like home anymore." Sophia's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know what it's like to lose family." He nodded, seeming to appreciate that she didn't offer empty platitudes. "What about you? You said your parents passed when you were 16. "Yes, fever took them both within days of each other," Sophia explained. "We had a small farm in California. When they died, there was no one but Uncle Vernon to take me in." She swallowed hard. "He made it clear from the start that he considered me a burden." "No one should ever make a child feel unwanted," Wyatt said, his voice carrying a note of steel. "Especially family." They crested a small rise, and suddenly the ranch came into view, a modest but well-built house with a large barn and several corrals. It nestled against the base of a rocky outcropping with a small creek winding its way across the property. Several horses grazed in a fenced pasture, including the other 7 Mustangs that now belonged to Sophia. "It's lovely," she breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "It needs work," Wyatt said modestly, "but it has good bones. Thornton knew how to build to last." As they approached, a young man emerged from the barn, lanky and freckled, no more than 18 or 19. "That's Timothy," Wyatt explained, "local boy I hired to help with the stock. Good with horses, though still learning. He lives in town with his mother but rides out daily." Timothy greeted them with a shy nod, his eyes widening slightly when Wyatt introduced Sophia as the owner of the Mustangs and his new ranch assistant. "I've fed and watered them, Mr. Finnegan," Timothy reported. "That paint stallion's got spirit, but the others are settling in fine." "Good man," Wyatt said approvingly. "Why don't you show Miss Ellis around while I see to a few things in the house?" The tour with Timothy was informative, if somewhat awkward due to the young man's shyness. He showed Sophia the barn with its 12 stalls, the tack room, the grain storage, and the various corrals used for different stages of training. It was clear that while the ranch wasn't yet operating at full capacity, Wyatt had a vision for it. "Mr. Finnegan says you're going to help with the breeding program," Timothy mentioned as they walked toward the pasture where Sophia's horses were grazing. "Does he?" Sophia replied, surprised. "He hadn't mentioned that specifically to me," Timothy flushed. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood, but he was real pleased about your Mustangs, said they'd bring good blood into his stock." Sophia pondered this as she approached the fence. Her horses, it still felt strange to think of them that way, raised their heads at her approach, curious but not fearful. The paint stallion Timothy had mentioned was particularly striking, with bold patches of black and white and an intelligent eye. "That one's a natural leader," came Wyatt's voice from behind her. "The others follow his lead." Sophia turned to find him watching her with an unreadable expression. "Timothy was just telling me you plan to use them in your breeding program. If you're amenable," Wyatt confirmed. "They're your horses, but they'd be valuable additions to what I'm trying to build here. We could work out an arrangement, a partnership of sorts." The word partnership sent an unexpected thrill through Sophia. It implied equality, respect, concepts that had been foreign in her relationship with her uncle. "I'd like that," she said simply. Wyatt smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Good. Now, how about I show you what I had in mind for your duties here? Unless you'd rather start with lunch, Mrs. Palmer packed quite a basket for us." The day passed quickly as Wyatt showed Sophia the workings of the ranch. Despite her uncle's prohibition, she'd always been drawn to horses and had secretly read every book about them she could get her hands on. Now, she was eager to put that theoretical knowledge into practice. Wyatt proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the daily routines, the feeding schedules, and the training methods he preferred. By mid-afternoon, Sophia had already helped groom 2 horses, learned how to properly clean a stall, and assisted in exercising a yearling filly. "You're a natural," Wyatt commented as they paused for a water break. "Most city folk are tentative around horses their size, but you don't seem intimidated at all." "I've always loved them," Sophia admitted. "When I was little, before we moved to the farm, my father would take me riding in the park every Sunday. Those are some of my happiest memories." Something in her voice must have conveyed the depth of her feeling, because Wyatt studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Horses have a way of healing wounds, both theirs and ours. They're honest creatures, no pretense, no malice." "Unlike people," Sophia said softly. "Some people," Wyatt corrected gently. "Not all." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared pain, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Then Timothy called from the barn, breaking the moment. "Mr. Finnegan." "That new mare's acting restless again." "Coming," Wyatt called back, then turned to Sophia. "We should probably head back to town soon anyway. I don't want Mrs. Palmer worrying about you on your first day." The ride back to Rhyolite was companionable, with Sophia feeling more confident in the saddle and increasingly comfortable in Wyatt's presence. They discussed plans for the next day, which horses needed attention, what tasks were priorities, how they might begin evaluating her Mustangs for their potential roles in the breeding program. "I was thinking," Wyatt said as they approached the outskirts of town, "you might want to give them names, your horses, I mean. Makes it easier than referring to the bay mare or the paint stallion." Sophia smiled, touched by the suggestion. "I'd like that. Though I might need some time to find the right names." "Take all the time you need," Wyatt assured her. "They're yours, after all." As they rode down the main street toward the boarding house, Sophia was acutely aware of the glances and whispers their passage provoked. Word of her situation had clearly spread throughout the small community, and now here she was, riding alongside the handsome newcomer who had rescued her from an unthinkable fate. "People are talking," she murmured, keeping her eyes fixed ahead. "Let them," Wyatt replied, his voice steady. "You've done nothing wrong, and neither have I." At the boarding house, he helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, looking down at her with those intense eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "I'll be ready," Sophia promised, suddenly reluctant to part from him. As she watched him ride away, leading Honey back to the ranch, Mrs. Palmer appeared beside her on the porch. "That's a good man," the older woman observed, following Sophia's gaze. "Not like most around here." "Yes," Sophia agreed quietly. "I think he is." That night, lying in her bed at the boarding house, Sophia found her thoughts returning again and again to Wyatt Finnegan. His kindness, his quiet strength, the way he treated her with respect rather than as a curiosity or an object of pity. She told herself it was natural to feel gratitude toward the man who had saved her from a terrible fate, natural even to admire him. But the warmth that spread through her chest when she recalled his smile was something else entirely, something both thrilling and terrifying in its potential. After 4 years of emotional numbness under her uncle's cruel regime, these feelings were almost overwhelming in their intensity. "Be sensible," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "He's your employer, your benefactor, nothing more." Yet even as she drifted off to sleep, Sophia couldn't quite convince herself that her heart believed what her mind was telling it. The weeks that followed settled into a pleasant rhythm. Each morning, Wyatt would arrive at the boarding house to escort Sophia to the ranch, and each evening he would return her safely to Mrs. Palmer's care. During the days, they worked side by side grooming horses, mucking stalls, repairing fences, and gradually implementing Wyatt's vision for the breeding operation. Timothy remained a constant presence as well, his initial shyness around Sophia giving way to a brotherly affection. The three of them made an efficient team, and under their care, the ranch began to thrive. Word spread about the quality of Wyatt's stock, and potential buyers started making the journey to see the horses for themselves. Sophia's Mustangs, meanwhile, had integrated well with Wyatt's existing herd. True to her word, she'd given each of them names. Thunder for the paint stallion, Honey for the dun mare she often rode, Willow for the graceful gray, Pepper for the black gelding with white socks, Rusty for the chestnut with the blazed face, Star for the bay with the perfect white star on her forehead, Breeze for the fleet-footed sorrel, and Shadow for the dark brown gelding who always seemed to be at Thunder's flank. As summer gave way to fall, Sophia found herself flourishing alongside the ranch. The physical work strengthened her body, while the daily interaction with the horses and the ranch's increasing visitors helped heal some of the emotional wounds her uncle had inflicted. She'd even started riding into town alone occasionally, her confidence growing with each passing day, but the most significant change was in her relationship with Wyatt. What had begun as gratitude had evolved into friendship, respect, and something deeper that neither of them had put into words. They worked together seamlessly, often communicating without speaking, anticipating each other's needs and movements in a way that felt natural and right. There were moments of brush of hands while passing tools, shared laughter over some mishap with the horses, quiet conversations as they rode side by side when Sophia felt certain that Wyatt's feelings mirrored her own. Yet he maintained a careful distance, never crossing the line between employer and employee, friend and something more. It was Mrs. Palmer who finally addressed the elephant in the room one evening as Sophia helped her prepare dinner for the boarders. "That man is in love with you," she stated matter-of-factly, chopping carrots with practiced efficiency. Sophia nearly dropped the plates she was setting out. What? No, we're just friends, colleagues." Mrs. Palmer raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Child, I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, like you're water in the desert." Heat rose to Sophia's cheeks. "Even if that were true, which I doubt, it would be inappropriate, he's my employer." "Pshaw," the older woman scoffed. "He gave you those horses, remember? If anything, you're partners in this venture. Besides, you're both free adults. Where's the impropriety?" Sophia busied herself with arranging silverware, trying to hide her confusion. "He lost his wife, Mrs. Palmer. His son, too. His heart belongs to them, Mrs." Palmer's expression softened as she set down her knife. "Love isn't a finite resource, Sophia. It doesn't work that way. Loving someone new doesn't diminish what he felt for his first family." She wiped her hands on her apron and came to stand beside Sophia. "The real question is, how do you feel about him?" The directness of the question caught Sophia off guard. How did she feel about Wyatt Finnegan? The man who had saved her from a life of servitude, who had given her back her dignity, who had treated her with nothing but respect and kindness. "I care for him," she admitted quietly. "More than I should, perhaps." "There's no should when it comes to matters of the heart," Mrs. Palmer said wisely, "only what is." Before Sophia could respond, there was a commotion from the front room, the door opening, voices raised in alarm. They hurried out to find Timothy standing in the doorway, his face pale beneath his freckles. "Miss Ellis," he gasped, out of breath as if he'd run all the way from the ranch. "It's Mr. Finnegan. There's been an accident." Sophia's heart seemed to stop in her chest. "What happened?" He's alive," Timothy assured her quickly. "But he's hurt bad. That new stallion, the one that came in yesterday, it spooked during the storm and kicked him when he was trying to calm it down. Doc Sullivan's with him now, but he was asking for you." "I'll get my coat," Sophia said, already moving toward the stairs. "I'll hitch up my wagon," Mrs. Palmer called after her. "It'll be faster than riding in this weather." Outside, the storm that had been threatening all afternoon had broken in earnest, with rain lashing down and lightning illuminating the darkening sky. It was a rare downpour for the desert region, turning the normally dusty streets into rivers of mud. Mrs. Palmer's wagon made slow progress through the muck, but to Sophia it felt like an eternity. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. How badly was Wyatt hurt? Timothy had said he was alive, but a kick from a frightened horse could cause devastating injuries, broken bones, internal bleeding, head trauma. By the time they reached the ranch, full darkness had fallen, with only the light spilling from the house windows to guide them. Timothy helped Sophia from the wagon, while Mrs. Palmer promised to wait and provide any assistance needed. Inside, the ranch house was unnaturally quiet save for the sound of rain drumming on the roof. Doc Sullivan, a gruff older man who'd been Rhyolite's physician since the town's founding, emerged from the bedroom as Sophia entered, shaking water from her coat. "Miss Ellis," he greeted her, his expression grave but not despairing. "Good you're here, he's been asking for you." "How is he?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lucky," Sullivan replied bluntly. "The kick caught him in the ribs and shoulder rather than the head. 3 broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, which I've reset, and a fair amount of bruising. Painful but not life-threatening, provided he rests and avoids infection." Relief made Sophia's knees weak. "Can I see him?" Sullivan nodded. "Just try to keep him calm. I've given him laudanum for the pain, but he's fighting it, wanting to stay awake until you arrived." He gathered his medical bag and headed for the door. "I'll check back tomorrow. Send the boy for me if his fever rises or if the pain becomes unmanageable." Sophia took a deep breath before entering the bedroom. It was a simply furnished space dominated by a large bed where Wyatt lay, his torso wrapped in bandages, his face ashen against the white pillows. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open at the sound of her approach. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice ragged, "you came." "Of course I came," she replied, moving to sit gently on the edge of the bed. "How could I not?" He tried to shift position and winced, a small groan escaping his lips despite obvious efforts to suppress it. "Don't move," Sophia instructed, instinctively placing a gentle hand on his uninjured arm. "Doc Sullivan says you need to rest." Wyatt's fingers found hers, clasping them weakly. "The horses are fine," she assured him. "Timothy's taken care of everything. The stallion's calmed down now that the storm's passing." She hesitated, then added softly, "You gave us quite a scare." His eyes, dulled by pain and medication but still alert, searched her face. "Us, me," Sophia admitted, her voice catching. "You scared me, Wyatt." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. His fingers tightened around hers. "I'm hard to kill," he said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. "Ask anyone." "Don't joke about such things," Sophia scolded gently. "Not now." The laudanum was clearly taking effect, his eyelids growing heavy despite his efforts to keep them open. "Stay," he murmured, "please." "I'm not going anywhere," she promised, settling more comfortably beside him. As Wyatt drifted into drug-induced sleep, Sophia remained at his side, her hand in his, watching the rise and fall of his bandaged chest. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, leaving only the gentle patter of rain on the roof. Mrs. Palmer appeared in the doorway, her expression softening at the sight of Sophia keeping vigil. "How is he?" "Sleeping now," Sophia replied quietly. "Doc Sullivan says he'll recover with rest." "That's good news," Mrs. Palmer said. "I've sent Timothy home to his mother with word that you'll be staying here tonight to look after Mr. Finnegan." At Sophia's startled look, she added, "It's the sensible thing, dear. He needs care and the roads are treacherous. Besides, I'll be here as chaperone, so there's nothing improper about it." Relief and gratitude washed over Sophia. "Thank you, I couldn't bear to leave him like this." Mrs. Palmer nodded knowingly. "I thought as much. I'll make up a bed for myself in the spare room and see about preparing some broth for when he wakes. You stay with him." Throughout the night, Sophia dozed intermittently in the chair she'd pulled up beside Wyatt's bed, waking whenever he stirred or showed signs of discomfort. She bathed his face with cool cloths when fever threatened, helped him sip water when thirst overcame him, and spoke soothingly when pain broke through the laudanum's effects. By dawn, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind a washed, clean world glistening in the early morning light. Wyatt's fever had broken, and he slept more naturally now, his breathing steady if still shallow due to his injured ribs. Sophia stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains, casting long shadows across the rain-soaked ranch yard. She felt exhausted yet strangely exhilarated, as if something fundamental had shifted during the night's vigil. "You're still here," Wyatt's voice, rough with sleep, came from behind her. She turned to find him watching her, his eyes clearer than they'd been the night before. I said I would be, she replied simply, moving back to his side. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Thank you. There's no need to thank me, Sophia said, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. You would have done the same for me. I would, Wyatt agreed. Then with visible effort he added, Sophia, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said before now. Her heart quickened. What is it? Before he could answer, Mrs. Palmer bustled in with a tray of steaming broth and fresh biscuits. Ah, you're awake. Excellent timing. You need nourishment to heal properly. The moment broken, Sophia helped Wyatt sit up against the pillows, careful of his bandaged torso, while Mrs. Palmer arranged the tray across his lap. Whatever he'd been about to say remained unspoken as they focused on the practical matter of breakfast. Over the next few days, an unspoken agreement developed between Sophia, Mrs. Palmer, and Timothy. Sophia would spend her days at the ranch, caring for Wyatt and overseeing the horse operations with Timothy's help. In the evenings, Mrs. Palmer would arrive with fresh supplies and stay the night as chaperone, allowing Sophia to return to the boarding house for proper rest. Wyatt, for his part, proved to be a difficult patient eager to return to his duties, despite Doc Sullivan's strict orders for bed rest. It fell to Sophia to enforce these instructions, which led to their first real argument. I can at least supervise from the porch, Wyatt insisted a week after the accident, his frustration evident. I'm not an invalid. You have 3 broken ribs and a shoulder that's barely beginning to heal, Sophia countered firmly. One wrong move could set your recovery back weeks. I can't just lie here while you and Timothy handle everything, he protested. It's not fair to either of you. Sophia planted her hands on her hips, exasperation overcoming her usual deference. And it would be fair for you to worsen your injuries and become a greater burden. Is that what you want? Wyatt looked stunned, then chagrined. No, of course not. Then trust us, Sophia said, her voice softening. The ranch won't fall apart in your absence. The horses are being cared for, the training continues, and Timothy is handling the potential buyers with remarkable maturity. A hint of pride crept into Wyatt's expression. The boy's coming into his own, isn't he? Yes, Sophia agreed, and I'm learning more every day. Consider it an investment in your future workforce. That made him smile, breaking the tension between them. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Ellis. I learned from the best, Mr. Finnegan, she replied, matching his formal tone with a teasing lilt. As Wyatt's recovery progressed, he was gradually allowed more movement, first short walks around the house, then supervised excursions to the porch where he could observe the ranch activities. Sophia remained his primary caretaker during the days, with Mrs. Palmer continuing her evening visits. It was during one of these porch sessions, nearly 3 weeks after the accident, that Wyatt finally returned to the conversation they'd begun that first morning. Do you remember what I was going to tell you? He asked as they watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Before Mrs. Palmer came in with breakfast that day, Sophia's heart skipped a beat. I remember you had something to say, she answered carefully. But not what it was. Wyatt shifted on the porch swing they shared, wincing slightly as his ribs protested the movement. I've been thinking a lot these past weeks, about life, about second chances. He paused, seemed to gather his thoughts. When that stallion kicked me, there was a moment, just a flash, where I thought, this is it. And in that moment, my biggest regret wasn't dying. It was dying without having told you how I feel. Sophia held her breath, afraid to hope yet unable to stop herself. And how do you feel? She asked softly. Wyatt turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. Like I've been given a miracle, twice. Once when I survived the accident, and once before that when you came into my life. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I never expected to feel this way again. After Eliza and Thomas died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. But then there you were, so brave, so resilient, so full of life despite everything you'd been through. Wyatt, Sophia began, her voice trembling slightly. Let me finish, he said. Please, I need to say this while I have the courage. He took a deep breath. I love you, Sophia Ellis. I've loved you since. I don't even know when it began. Maybe that first day when I saw you standing on your uncle's porch, refusing to be broken by circumstance. Or maybe it grew day by day as we worked together, as I watched you blossom here at the ranch. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. I'm not asking for anything, Wyatt continued hastily, misinterpreting her tears. I know there's a complicated history between us, your gratitude, my role in your life. If friendship is all you can offer, I'll treasure that and never ask for more. You wonderful, foolish man, Sophia said through her tears. Do you really not know? Can you not see it every time I look at you? Hope dawned in Wyatt's eyes. See what? That I love you too, she said simply. That I have almost from the beginning, though I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or admiration. The revelation hung between them for a heartbeat, and then Wyatt was drawing her closer, one hand gently cradling her face. Sophia, he breathed, his voice filled with wonder. Their first kiss was tender, almost reverent, a careful exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate as years of loneliness and months of unspoken longing found release. When they finally parted, both were breathing raggedly, and Wyatt's arm had tightened around her despite the pain it must have caused his ribs. I've wanted to do that for so long, he confessed, his forehead resting against hers. Then why didn't you? Sophia asked. Wyatt sighed. At first, it seemed wrong taking advantage of your vulnerable position, your gratitude. Then, as time passed and those concerns faded, I worried about the gossip it might cause in town, how it might affect your reputation. My reputation, Sophia laughed softly. I'm the woman who was nearly traded for horses. I think my reputation was compromised long before I met you. You're the woman who survived hardship with her dignity intact, Wyatt corrected her firmly. And I won't have anyone thinking less of you, especially not because of me. The depth of his consideration touched Sophia profoundly. So what happens now? She asked. Now, Wyatt said thoughtfully, I think we should speak with Mrs. Palmer and perhaps Reverend Thompson. Sophia's eyes widened. Are you suggesting? Marriage, Wyatt confirmed, his gaze steady on hers. If you'll have me. Not right away, we should court properly first, give people time to adjust to the idea. But yes, Sophia Ellis, I would be honored to make you my wife. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and effervescent. I think I'd like that very much, Mr. Finnegan. His answering smile was radiant. Good, because I intend to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. As the last light faded from the sky, they remained on the porch swing, hands entwined, hearts full, watching as the first stars appeared above the desert horizon. For both, it was a moment of perfect peace, a new beginning built on mutual respect, shared experience, and a love that had emerged against all odds in the harsh beauty of the Nevada wilderness. The news of Wyatt and Sophia's courtship spread through Rhyolite with the speed only a small town could manage. By the time Wyatt was well enough to escort Sophia to Sunday services, 2 weeks later, their relationship was the primary topic of conversation among the townsfolk. Most reactions were positive. There was something undeniably romantic about the story of the woman saved from a terrible fate by a good man, with whom she'd subsequently fallen in love. A few, however, raised eyebrows or whispered behind fans about propriety and Sophia's character. These whispers invariably fell silent whenever Mrs. Palmer was nearby, as the formidable boarding house proprietress had appointed herself guardian of the couple's reputation and would brook no malicious gossip. Pay them no mind, Mrs. Palmer advised when she caught Sophia looking uncomfortable after church one Sunday. There will always be those who find fault where none exists, usually to distract from their own shortcomings. Sophia tried to follow this wise counsel, focusing instead on the joy of openly walking at Wyatt's side, accepting his arm without pretense, sharing smiles that no longer needed to be hidden. Their courtship followed all the proper conventions: chaperoned outings, public appearances at town events, visits with Wyatt seated formally in Mrs. Palmer's parlor, but these formalities did nothing to diminish the deepening connection between them. Meanwhile, the ranch continued to flourish. Word of Wyatt's eye for good horseflesh and his humane training methods spread beyond Rhyolite, bringing buyers from as far away as Carson City and even San Francisco. Sophia's Mustangs proved to be valuable additions to the breeding program, with Thunder siring several promising foals and the mares demonstrating endurance and intelligence that enhanced Wyatt's existing stock. As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, Wyatt and Sophia began making plans for the future. They would marry in the spring, when the desert bloomed briefly after the winter rains. Sophia would move permanently to the ranch, which they would expand together, building on the foundation Wyatt had established. These plans were momentarily disrupted one crisp December morning when Timothy arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual, his expression troubled. "Miss Ellis, Mr. Finnegan sent me to fetch you," he said, shifting anxiously from foot to foot. "There's a man at the ranch asking for you." Sophia frowned. "What man? Did he give his name?" Timothy nodded grimly. "Said his name is Vernon Ellis, your uncle." Shock and a sick dread swept through Sophia. She hadn't seen or heard from her uncle since the day Wyatt had rescued her nearly 6 months ago. "What could he possibly want now?" "I'll get my coat," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. During the ride to the ranch, Timothy explained that Vernon had arrived just after dawn, demanding to see his niece. Wyatt had told him to wait while he sent for Sophia, making it clear that any conversation would happen on their terms, not Vernon's. "Mr. Finnegan wasn't happy to see him," Timothy added. "Had me stay close, just in case." "Thank you," Sophia said, grateful for the young man's loyalty. When they arrived, Sophia found Wyatt waiting on the porch, his expression grim. Beyond him, she could see her uncle seated at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee before him. "You don't have to see him," Wyatt said quietly as he helped her down from her horse. "I can send him away." Sophia appreciated the offer but shook her head. "No, I need to face him." "Find out what he wants." Wyatt's hand squeezed hers reassuringly. "I'll be right beside you." Vernon looked smaller somehow as Sophia entered the kitchen, less imposing than she remembered. His clothes were worn, his face haggard beneath several days' growth of beard. He stood when he saw her, his expression an uncomfortable mix of resentment and desperation. "Sophia," he acknowledged stiffly. "Uncle Vernon," she replied, her voice cool. "What brings you here?" He shifted awkwardly, avoiding her direct gaze. "Heard you were doing well for yourself." "Working for Finnegan here, owning horses." "I am," Sophia confirmed, "but I doubt you rode all this way for a family reunion." Vernon glanced at Wyatt, who stood protectively at Sophia's side, then back at his niece. "Lost the ranch," he admitted grudgingly. "Bank took it last month." "I'm sorry to hear that," Sophia said, and was surprised to realize she meant it, not for Vernon's sake, but for the land that had been in her father's family for generations. "Figured you might be willing to help," Vernon continued, a wheedling note entering his voice. "Family and all. Maybe put in a word with your employer here." He eyed Wyatt speculatively. "Could use work, a place to stay." Sophia felt Wyatt tense beside her but kept her eyes on her uncle. "You traded me for horses," she said evenly. "Treated me like property for 4 years. And now you come here expecting charity." Vernon's face darkened. "Now see here, girl, I took you in when no one else would, fed and clothed you all those years. You worked me like a servant and then tried to sell me to a man everyone knew was cruel," Sophia countered, finding strength in speaking the truth. "Whatever obligation I might have felt toward you died that day." "So that's how it is," Vernon spat, his momentary humility evaporating. "Got yourself a protector and suddenly you're too good for your own kin." "Miss Ellis doesn't need a protector," Wyatt interjected, his voice dangerously calm. "She's more than capable of handling her own affairs. But as it happens, she's also my fiancée, and I won't have you speaking to her that way in our home." The revelation seemed to knock the wind from Vernon's sails. He stared between them, clearly reassessing the situation. "Fiancée, eh? Well now, that changes things." "It changes nothing," Sophia said firmly. "I won't help you, Uncle Vernon, not with money, not with work, not with anything. But I will offer you this," Wyatt added, surprising both Ellises. A meal, a night's lodging in the barn, and enough provisions for your journey elsewhere. That's all. Vernon's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Don't need your charity, he growled, pushing back from the table. It's not charity, Wyatt replied. It's basic human decency, something you might want to acquaint yourself with. For a moment, it seemed Vernon might lash out, but something in Wyatt's steady gaze made him think better of it. Instead, he grabbed his hat from the table and jammed it on his head. Keep your fancy meal, he muttered. I'll find my own way. As he stomped toward the door, Sophia called after him. Uncle Vernon. He paused, glancing back. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I won't carry your cruelty with me anymore. Vernon stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then, without another word, he walked out, mounted his horse, and rode away. Sophia watched him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a surprising sense of closure. Wyatt's arm slipped around her waist, offering silent support. Are you all right? He asked when Vernon had disappeared from view. Yes, Sophia said, and realized it was true. I think I needed that to face him as an equal, not as a frightened girl under his control. Wyatt pressed a kiss to her temple. You were magnificent. She leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. Where do you think he'll go? I don't know, Wyatt admitted, but that's not your concern anymore. Your future is here with me if you still want it. Sophia turned in his arms to face him fully. I want it more than anything. Their kiss was a promise of healing, of new beginnings, of a love that would continue to grow in the fertile ground they'd prepared together. The winter passed swiftly, with preparations for the spring wedding keeping everyone busy. Mrs. Palmer took charge of Sophia's trousseau, enlisting the help of the other boarding house residents to create a modest but beautiful collection of garments. Wyatt, meanwhile, added a new wing to the ranch house, including a proper parlor and a bedroom larger than the one he'd been occupying, with windows that captured both the sunrise and sunset. February brought the winter rains, transforming the desert almost overnight. By early March, the landscape was carpeted with wildflowers in a breathtaking display that seemed designed specifically to herald Sophia and Wyatt's wedding day. The ceremony took place on the ranch, with Reverend Thompson officiating beneath an archway Timothy had constructed and decorated with desert blooms. Nearly everyone from Rhyolite attended, along with buyers and breeders who had become friends over the months of business dealings. Mrs. Palmer, resplendent in her best dress, gave Sophia away. Timothy stood as Wyatt's best man, his freckled face solemn with the responsibility. And in a touch that moved Sophia deeply, her 8 Mustangs groomed to gleaming perfection were arranged in a semicircle behind the wedding party, as if bearing witness to the union. Sophia wore a gown of ivory satin, simple in design but elegant in its lines. Her hair was adorned with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of desert sage and wildflowers. But her greatest ornament was her radiant smile as she walked toward Wyatt, who watched her approach with undisguised awe. The vows they exchanged were traditional, yet spoken with such conviction that many guests found themselves blinking back tears. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled company startled birds from the nearby trees. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up in the ranch yard, lanterns hanging from the corral fences, and a local fiddler providing music for dancing. Sophia and Wyatt moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their happiness infectious. As twilight deepened into dusk, Wyatt led Sophia away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. They walked to the small rise behind the barn, where they could see the entire ranch spread out before them, golden in the fading light. Happy, Mrs. Finnegan? Wyatt asked, his arm around her waist. Beyond words, Sophia replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here as your wife, mistress of this beautiful ranch, surrounded by friends and horses, you'd have thought them mad, Wyatt finished for her with a chuckle. Completely, she agreed, and yet here we are. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I have something for you," Wyatt said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He placed a small package wrapped in silk in her hand. Sophia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny, expertly rendered painting of Thunder, her paint stallion, on one side. The other side was empty. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I thought perhaps in time we might add another miniature to the empty side," Wyatt suggested. "Of our child when we're blessed." Tears of happiness welled in Sophia's eyes. "It's perfect, thank you." She looked up at him with all the love in her heart. "And thank you for the horses." Wyatt's brow furrowed in momentary confusion. "The horses, the ones you bought from Green," Sophia clarified. "The ones that brought us together. I never properly thanked you for them." Understanding dawned in Wyatt's eyes, followed by a tender smile. "Best investment I ever made," he said softly, drawing her closer. "Though I didn't buy horses that day, Sophia, I bought freedom, yours, and unknowingly my own." As their lips met beneath the star-studded Nevada sky, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that their story, which had begun with an act of desperation and cruelty, had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. Like the desert surrounding them, what had once seemed barren had blossomed into unexpected life, proving that even in the harshest landscapes, love could take root and flourish. In the years that followed, the Finnegan Ranch grew into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the territory. Wyatt's expertise combined with Sophia's intuitive understanding of the animals created a partnership that produced some of the finest stock in Nevada. Thunder's bloodline became particularly sought after, known for intelligence, endurance, and even temperament. Timothy, who had been like a younger brother to them both, eventually became a full partner in the business when he came of age. His talent with the horses, particularly in gentling the more spirited ones, proved invaluable as the ranch's reputation spread. Mrs. Palmer remained a dear friend and frequent visitor, becoming Grandma Palmer to the Finnegan children when they arrived. First a son they named David, born exactly 1 year after their wedding, and then twin daughters, Elizabeth and Rose, who came along 3 years later. All three inherited their parents' love for horses and the ranch life, though each in their own way. David showed Wyatt's head for business, Elizabeth had Sophia's gentle way with the animals, and Rose exhibited a daring riding style that both terrified and impressed her parents. As for Vernon Ellis, they heard only scattered reports over the years. He drifted north to the silver mines for a time, then west to California during a brief gold rush. Occasionally, letters would arrive from distant places, never apologetic, but increasingly reflective as age and hard living took their toll. Sophia always responded with news of the family and the ranch, maintaining the slim connection without allowing it to disrupt the life she'd built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wyatt surprised Sophia with a special gift, a leather-bound album containing photographs of each of her original 8 Mustangs, along with their most notable offspring. The final page held a family portrait. Wyatt and Sophia seated with their children arranged around them, and in the background, Thunder, now an elderly stallion but still regal, looking on like a patriarch overseeing his domain. "Sometimes I wonder," Sophia said that night as they sat on the porch swing that had witnessed their first declaration of love, "what would have happened if you hadn't ridden up that day? If you hadn't heard the gossip in town?" Wyatt took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that years of ranch work had built badges of honor rather than flaws. "I've thought about that too, but I prefer to believe it was meant to be, that somehow we would have found each other." Sophia smiled at the romantic notion, so at odds with her practical husband's usual manner. 8 horses, she mused. That's what I was worth to my uncle. Who could have imagined they'd lead to all of this? "You were always worth far more than horses, my love," Wyatt said firmly. Green and your uncle were just too blind to see it. From inside the house came the sound of children's laughter, followed by David's voice calling for his parents to settle some minor dispute. The familiar noise of family life, of love and occasional chaos, of belonging and purpose wrapped around them like a warm blanket. "We should go in," Sophia said, making no move to rise. "In a minute," Wyatt replied, pulling her closer. "First, I'd like to kiss my wife." As their lips met, Sophia reflected that some trades horses for freedom, solitude for companionship, past pain for present joy were more than fair. They were miraculous. And this miracle, built day by day through love and labor, would continue to flourish long after the memory of how it began had faded into family legend. In the soft Nevada twilight, with the scent of sage on the breeze and the distant nickering of horses in the paddocks, Sophia Finnegan knew herself to be not just free, but truly, deeply blessed.